Hey guys, it's me, Dr. May. How are you? How are my DBT peeps doing today? Okay, so today we're continuing with interpersonal effectiveness, and this topic is all about saying no. Okay, and this is adapted from the DBT manual, but it's a little bit of my spin on it. So I hope you like it. I hope it makes sense to you, and you know, we'll check it out. Okay. All right, so quick review into personal effectiveness. It's all about people skills, like how we relate to each other, how we go about getting what we want, keeping a good relationship, and preserving our self-respectiveness. I'm sorry, self-respect. I'm looking at effectiveness and I got the word mixed up. So it's about either building or maintaining our self-respect, okay? So specifically, we're gonna focus on saying no today because that's something we all have to do from time to time, or maybe a lot, okay? So I'm gonna break it down a little differently than the manual, but it's definitely tied into the manual. Okay, so let's look at this first. Sometimes we're in such a state of mind that we have like this tendency to give an automatic no, and it's driven by our emotional mind. So in some states of mind, we feel kind of like threatened or vulnerable or overwhelmed or intruded upon by the other person or by the situation we're in. And letting anything more in feels like too much of a threat. So sometimes before we even fully consider what it is we're being offered or given or whatever, we just jump to a no really quickly. I actually heard from a guy named Daniel Amen, who does all these brain SPECT scans on all different kinds of people, like thousands and thousands of people, that he found that certain people with ADHD, attention deficit disorder, have a tendency to do this. That it's just the way their brain is wired up that they tend to jump to a no really fast. But the rest of us might do it sometimes too, you know, depending on how things are going. Okay, and sometimes it has to also do with a fear of change or trying something new, right? So that kind of creates another vulnerability, right? We're letting something new into our world, and you know, we don't know if it's going to be harmful or hurtful or whatever. So sometimes we preemptively just say no because we're afraid to let it in. Okay, so we block whatever the gift is or the offer or whatever it happens to be. So how does this come across? So sometimes, you know, defensively, we try to protect ourselves. So we get willful or stubborn or rigid about the way we respond, and the no comes very quickly, perhaps even before considering fully what the request was. Sometimes if we're mad at the person and they ask us to do something, we might say no just out of spite, just to piss them off, or maybe they let us down in the past, and so we're like, oh yeah, well, I'm gonna say no to you too, right? Sometimes, you know, because we're feeling vulnerable, we don't want to accept influence from other people because we're afraid it's going to make them feel like they have more control over us, or we're inviting in that controlling, you know, nature from somebody else, and that feels really bad. And sometimes we also have what they call like a scarcity mindset, like the feeling that, you know, I don't have enough to give. So if I'm asked to do something or give something, I'll feel like I'm not going to have enough. So I say no to the request to give of myself because I feel like, you know, I'm kind of in that scarce mode and I need to preserve what I have. Okay, so that's actually another emotional mind reason. Okay, so if you're one of the people that struggle with this from time to time, these are some questions that the DBT manual suggests that we could ask ourselves, right? Before we automatically jump to a no. So do I have what the person wants? You know, if you don't, then don't worry about it, just say no. But maybe if you do, and it's okay to give it, you could consider it. Is it a bad time for me to say no? Right? If it's an urgent request and it's important, you could help right now and you have the ability to help, maybe, you know, it's okay to say yes. Is the request clear? Do we ever say no before we really understand it? Sometimes. If you're not sure what the person means, you could always ask them to clarify, right? That's another way to handle that. Does the person have authority over me? So sometimes, let's say if your boss or your parent asks you to do something, parent, if you happen to still be living under their roof or something, it may not always be the best thing to say no, right? If you say no to certain requests at work or from school, let's say, you know, that could kind of maybe get you into some trouble, especially if it's a reasonable request. So we have to be, you know, careful about that. Does saying no violate the person's rights? You know, if someone says, excuse me, can you show me where the bathroom is? And you say no, sorry. Is that really nice or fair? Is it violating their right to be comfortable and take care of business? Perhaps, right? Certain no's aren't really appropriate. Or if someone's really allowed to do something and you say no, that's not right either, right? If you work in a store and someone comes to you as a cashier and says, I'd like to take back this item, and they have the receipt, it's within 30 days and they totally can, but you just didn't like the person, you shouldn't say no to them. That's against the rules, right? You got to say yes when it's appropriate to say yes. Okay. All right. Does the person give me a lot? Do I owe the person something? So you can't just be a taker, right? If the person's always giving to you and helping you, and then they ask you for a favor, it's probably not so bad to say yes. Okay. Especially if it's a fair request. Don't just jump to a no. Excuse me. Okay. So does no interfere with long-term goals? So if my therapist says, I'd like you to try a new skill, and I say, no, I really don't want to. I'm not really comfortable with that. That might interfere with my long-term goal of, living a better life, or, having a life worth living, or being self-injury free. So being, afraid about it and saying no could get in the way of my goals. And does my wise mind say yes? So later on, we're going to talk about why the wise mind would say no. But if a wise mind says yes, it means that, based on the situation, taking in all the considerations here, it makes a lot of sense to do it. So if that's the case, it might be worth considering. All right. And if you're not sure, you could always talk it over with somebody and run it by someone if you want a second opinion, right? Sometimes it's hard to sort it out in our own head. Okay, so this is the flip side. And we could have both of these sides that kind of alternately operate for us. So emotional mind fears of saying no. So instead of being compulsively saying no, when maybe it's not necessary, sometimes we're a little afraid of saying no, right? Especially if we're concerned about the other person's reaction, right? Like, what if they're so used to me saying yes that if I finally say no, they won't like me anymore? Or they'll abandon me and they'll leave the relationship and it's all going to be over, right? Or they'll be disappointed in me, or they'll think I'm selfish, right? God, we're so worried about other people's opinions sometimes, aren't we? Right? Or we're worried we're going to start judging ourselves. Like, man, I must mean I'm selfish if I'm not helping people. Maybe I'm so used to being a people pleaser or caretaking, and that's how I get my self-esteem. So if I don't do that all the time, I'm afraid I'm not worth anything. So I have to keep giving in order to feel okay. But that's just my stuff, right? That's not like a universal truth. That's just what, my mind is telling me. Okay. Another concern, which I skipped over here, is that sometimes when you say no, no should be a statement, right? No, period. But sometimes people try to negotiate your no, right? They demand an explanation, and then you give one and they're not happy with your explanation, and they keep asking for more and more. And maybe you don't even want to explain, it's personal. Or they try to talk you out of the no, and that could make you really uncomfortable, right? That they don't really just accept it and move on. And you hate to get into that exchange because it's, it's kind of uncomfortable, right? So sometimes we hesitate, and it would be easier just to say yes and avoid that whole thing. But if it's important to say no, we still have to work through those fears and work through those concerns interpersonally. Okay, so if you're the kind of person that sometimes has fears of saying no for those reasons, these are some cheerleading statements or self-talk you could use to kind of pump yourself up so you can say no when you actually need it. Okay, so one is, if I say no to people and they get angry, it doesn't mean I should have said yes. Okay, if you're truly doing the right thing for you, then it's okay, even if other people don't like that. Okay, because sometimes we inevitably have to disappoint people, and that's just life. Okay. Next, if you're one of the people pleaser caretaker types, all right, giving is not the be all of life. I'm an important person in this world too. Okay, so it's about balancing the self-care, self-respect with the give skill, with taking care of good relationships. So there's a give and there's a take, right? You don't have to be the one giving all the time and being afraid that once I stop giving, this relationship's over. Because if that's really what the relationship's based on, maybe it's time to start looking at that relationship. Maybe it needs a little work. Maybe you need a discussion about this with the person. Okay, so enough about that. Next, 3, I am under no obligation to say yes to people simply because they ask a favor of me, right? So sometimes we're so used to saying yes that we forget that we can even say no, all right? 4, if I refuse to do a favor for people, that doesn't mean I'm being mean to them or they'll stop liking me, all right? Same idea. The fact that I say no to someone does not make me a selfish person, okay? Calling yourself selfish is a judgment. Maybe people have told you that before. That's also their judgment. It's not a statement of fact about you, okay? So you gotta, have a clearer view of what it actually means when you're saying no. And maybe it's just to preserve your self-respect and to do what's, right for you. And that's not necessarily selfish. It's self-nourishing. All right, finally, no can be a full sentence, and I don't need to explain myself. Even if the person asks you to explain yourself, you don't necessarily owe them an explanation, okay? And it takes a lot of courage, like I said here, up on the top, and strength to do this, but it's worth it, okay? It's gonna pay off for your self-esteem and your self-respect. Okay, so intensity of saying no. So this applies to both of those, sides of the coin. So whether you're a compulsive no-sayer or you're a hesitant no-sayer, that you're afraid to say no, let's look at this, right? So say it's like turning up the volume. So if you look at that volume icon on the top, sometimes we could very subtly hint that we don't really want to do something, but we'll be willing to do it anyway. Other times we'll be a little bit more direct about, yeah, I'm not really sure I want to do it, but all right. Or if it gets a little bit more important, you might want to amp it up a little bit, be a little bit more insistent about the no, be a little more firm about it. And in a very extreme case, if the person's not listening to our words, we have to literally just walk away and not do it, okay? So if you compulsively say no and you're too firm about your no, or you're too nasty about your no because you're so wrapped up in your emotional mind, the first half of those things might be something you need to work on. So at times you might need to be a little bit more calm and quiet and subtle about your no, a little more indirect and, not as forceful. If you're hesitant about saying no, maybe you need to do some of the higher numbers on this list and be a little bit more strong, a little bit more direct, right? So you got to judge, based on your situation and based on your issues with no, where you need to fall on the spectrum. And it also needs to be appropriate for the situation. Okay, so you got to remember who you're saying no to, what's the timing of it, and all those other questions that we talked about before. Okay, so wise mind, it's about time, right? So we'll call this the wise mind appropriate no. All right, so what are some legit situations for when no is appropriate and we should say no? Okay, so no is appropriate when it's a no to preserve our self-respect. Okay, so being clear about what's right for me, what isn't right for me, what's intrusive and inappropriate for me and not, all that has to be weighed when I'm saying no. So if the no helps me to block unwanted and intrusive behavior from another person, then that's appropriate. I don't necessarily need to let that in because that's going to be a violation and it's going to just make me feel bad. No is appropriate when we're setting limits on how much we're willing to do or give so we stay in our comfort zone, right? If I'm giving all the time, it may be beyond what I'm comfortable doing. And I might overburden and overstress myself saying yes too much, right? So if I figure out exactly how much work is comfortable for me, then anything beyond that, I could say no to. Or I could only say yes to the things that are the most important and say no to the things that are less important. And that'll help me stay in a giving mode that's more comfortable for me. So I can still balance the self-care. See how that works? Okay. And then if something doesn't fit with your values or the request isn't appropriate, it's totally fine to say no. So if someone at work is trying to get you to steal money, or someone at school is trying to get you to cheat on a test, that could be in violation of your values as well as whatever rules are there. And if you want to say no to that and no feels right for you, you should definitely say no to that, okay? Because how are you going to have your self-respect if you start doing things that violate your values, okay? I hope that makes sense. All right, so when you're in wise mind and you're trying to say no in a calm and assertive manner, these are some sentence stems that could help you. Okay, so I'm going to read them, but you could practice pausing this video here and filling in the sentence stems however you like to, or maybe based on a situation that you're dealing with right now. All right, so here we go. So starting from the upper left. No thanks, I don't want to. Please don't. Please stop. I don't like it when you. I can't come because. I'd prefer not to. I'd rather not. Right now, I'm not in the mood to. I'm not comfortable. I'm not able to. Right now, I'm too busy to. And I'm not interested. Okay, so see how it sounds kind of polite and assertive, but you could, once you fill it in, you could give that direct answer or explanation for the no when it's appropriate to give an explanation. Again, it's not always necessary to give an explanation. Okay, so I hope this makes sense to you, all right? And practice your no's when appropriate, although I hope you'll say yes to this skill because it's a useful one, okay? So give it a try, practice up, use your skills, and I'll see you soon. All right, bye guys.